Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson. Hope you all had a wonderful Halloween season. October is over, but the horror doesn't stop. We have a great guest to kick off November. Nathan Ballingrud is here, one of the best horror writers in the world, one of the best writers in the world, period. We're going to talk to Nathan about his new book, Cathedral of the Drowned, the Lunar Gothic Trilogy, which Cathedral of the Drowned is book 2 of the Lunar Gothic Trilogy, his writing process, writing short fiction, writing longer fiction, all of that great stuff. And we're going to dig into Dread, one of the best stories from Clive Barker's Books of Blood. It's a fantastic conversation with one of my favorite writers in the world. I'm so grateful to Nathan for doing this, and I hope you enjoy it. But first, I want to tell you all that Predator Badlands is amazing. I caught a press screening Monday night reviewing the film for Dread Central. My review is now up at dreadcentral.com if you want to go read it. The short version is Dan Trachtenberg did it again. If you like Prey or Predator Killer of Killers, any of the stuff that Dan has done in that franchise so far, you're going to love this. It is bigger, it is louder, it is crazier. It is the theatrical Predator experience that we have been wanting ever since Prey came out 3 years ago. So, if you were one of those people who really wish that you could see Prey on a big screen and you want something even bigger now, go see Predator Badlands. It rules. I loved it. That is my recommendation for you this week. Now, let's head over to our conversation with Nathan Ballingrud. Joining us this week on The Scares That Shaped Us is one of my favorite writers of horror fiction working right now. You will know him from short story collections like North American Lake Monsters and Wounds, as well as novels like The Strange. The second book in his Lunar Gothic trilogy, Cathedral of the Drowned, is available now. Nathan Ballingrud, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. I have been a fan for quite a while, going back to North American Lake Monsters, and was really excited when I not only when I heard about the Lunar Gothic trilogy, but when I cracked open that first book, Crypt of the Moon Spider, and went, "Oh, this is just Nathan's imagination running completely wild with sci-fi horror, cosmic fantasy craziness." Um, I'm not going to ask you to try to run through what the Lunar Gothic trilogy is about, because I think we'd be here for a while. But I will ask you, like, for readers who don't know, where does Cathedral of the Drowned pick up the action?
So, without trying to give away the end of Crypt of the Moon Spider, Cathedral of the Drowned picks up about a year later. Our characters have found themselves in new circumstances as a result of what happens at the end of Crypt, and we pick up. The first scene takes place in back on Earth in Brooklyn in the late 1920s, and we start by well, in fact, both of the main thrusts of the narrative follow two side characters from Crypt of the Moon Spider, although the principals do return as well.
Yeah. So this is for those who have read Crypt of the Moon Spider, and again, we're not going to spoil it. You should go read it. It will take you like 2 hours. They're short books. But this is following Charlie Duchamp, who was kind of the enforcer guy from the previous book from Crypt of the Moon Spider, and Goodnight Maggie, who is a crime boss in New York back on Earth. And I immediately, when I started reading this, was so happy that you were playing with gangster stuff, especially because one of the first stories of yours I read was The Atlas of Hell, which does that same blending of crime and horror slash fantasy fun. What when you started to plan out this trilogy, did you sort of know that the gangster stuff was going to be a key ingredient and you would get to kind of do your Roaring Twenties sci-fi thing, or did that just kind of emerge as you got to know Charlie?
Definitely the latter. I had no idea that it was coming. I didn't know that I was going to want to write more than just the first novella until I got to the segment where we follow Charlie and his point of view, and I got a little bit, I fleshed out some of the place where he came from, the setting and the life he came from, and I love doing that so much that immediately these other ideas started to flow out of that. Um, I liked I liked writing him, and I was intrigued by the character of Goodnight Maggie, and that's where she came. She just kind of came unannounced when I was writing that scene in Crypt. Um, and it was then that I realized there were not necessarily more stories to tell, but different facets of the story to tell. Like everyone's perspective, um, as the narrative moves along, is so different from the characters that they're interacting with. That I thought it'd be fascinating to kind of follow the main story, not through one set of eyes, but through a sequence of perspectives.
Well, and you
That
have
makes
this amazing thing as well, which it is not a spoiler because I checked and it's on the jacket copy for Cathedral of the Drowned, which is that Charlie is there are actually two Charlies at this point in the story because Charlie's brain has been bisected, and part of it is on Io, the moon of Jupiter, Io, and part of it is still this sort of hulking enforcer guy on the moon. Um, what and like you said, you're writing from so many different voices here because Maggie is also very important to this narrative, and she has her own outlook. Um, what was it? Do you find it difficult to transition between voices like that, especially in the case of Charlie when it's two different guys who are the same guy, or is it? What is your process for sort of getting into each narrative perspective there?
I don't find it difficult. I find it very organic to the story. And because their voices are so distinct, um, it's it's not hard to switch channels in my own head. And also they all have very distinct personalities. It's like they're not like ciphers like some characters tend to be.
Mm-hmm.
Like some stories want their characters to be ciphers. That's how the stories work best. These aren't. These are kind of um, large than life characters. When I was writing these things, I was thinking Dickens. I was like, let these characters be broad and let them be not necessarily ridiculous in how they act or what they say, because I hope that's not the case, but just a little outsized in their points of view and how they react in a world which is itself kind of maximalist in its expressions. And so I found it easy and fun to jump around.
It's interesting that you mentioned Dickens because in reading this and reading the way that you envision uh the environment on Io as one example, and even when you factor in the sort of satellite that carries half of Charlie around, and the cathedral ship, which I won't spoil what the cathedral ship is, but it's in the title of the book. You'll get to it, readers. But it called to mind for me the sort of Edgar Rice Burroughs, Jules Verne tradition of genre fiction, those sort of big, splashy adventure stories. And Dickens feels like part of that continuum in the way that he was able to write these kind of mass entertainments and create those big, broad characters. And anyone who's read something like The Strange knows that you've got that kind of Ray Bradbury experience influence lurking in your books. But looking back to like the earlier pulps and 19th century literature and things like that, who do you feel like your influences are in writing something like this?
Well, I think the influences are the artists. You know, I
Oh
think,
yeah.
uh, I think, I mean, with obvious deference to Edgar Rice Burroughs, who I read a lot as a kid. Um, but most of the pulp influence comes from the covers of those fantastic magazines and comics that were published back then. I went through a stage a few years ago where I was starting to go back because the art was compelling me and I was responding so positively to it. As I was looking back at it, I decided, well, I think this probably means that maybe I will respond that well to the stories too. But I didn't so much. There are some good ones in there, but there's most of the stories are just not nearly as kinetic or as fun or as exciting as the cover art was, or the interior art. You get artists like Wallace Wood and Margaret Brundage and Hannes Bach and all kinds of Virgil Finlay. You could go on, and that's the stuff that really gets me fired up. And so with the Lunar Gothic trilogy, what I really wanted to do was take a sort of literate sensibility, the same kind of sensibility that I was using in North American Lake Monsters, where I try to make these psychologically true characters
Mm-hmm.
and put them in a world in which I get to play with all the fun toys that I saw on the covers of those magazines, and not downplay those things, not wink at the reader and say, "Isn't this kind of silly?" And I know this is ridiculous, but take it all with the utmost seriousness. Take the internal psychology of Veronica Brinkley or Charlie Duchamp as seriously as I take moon forests and jungle moons on Jupiter, and like it's all. I just treat it all like realism, but I just don't let any fear of uh, realism get in the way of the idea. Yeah, the idea has primacy, and just let everything else go.
This is the power of committing to the bit with
Yeah, that's a much
with
more precise way.
with cross genre stuff. Now, as we mentioned, Cathedral of the Drowned is the second book in this trilogy of novella length works, I suppose. Uh, book three is coming up. What can you tell us about book three?
So, book three, the title is Kingdom of the Conqueror Worm, an overt tip of the cap to Edgar Allan Poe.
Mm.
And this takes place after the events of Cathedral. And this time we're in the headspace of the primary antagonist, who's Dr. Barrington Cull.
Mm.
And he is working as a ship's doctor on a prison vessel, which is going out into the deeper solar system and kind of loses its way. And they go farther and farther out until they discover what has heretofore been undiscovered for them in their timeline, which is Pluto. Because this takes place in 1928, I think it is. And Pluto wasn't discovered until 29. So they don't expect it to be out there, and they
Mm.
encounter it. And things happen there. So
I'm and
that's
that
what
will be out next year.
that's the plan.
Okay, excellent.
If I
Kingdom of
can
the
keep my end
Conqueror
bargain.
Worm. Um, so before we move on to the topic that you brought today, which I'm so excited about, I have a little bit of sort of inside podcast business to ask you about. So
Sure.
the backstory here is Clay McLeod Chapman, who is a friend of our show, has been on our show three times, was here a few weeks ago promoting his short story collection. And we talked about a story featuring you as a character.
Yeah.
Uh, he wrote a
Right.
story for listeners who may not remember called I believe it's called Nathan Ballingrud's Haunting Horror Rex, about a couple of horror fans who decide to get in their car and drive to the bookstore where fictional Nathan works and ask fictional Nathan for horror book recommendations because they think that he will have the best ones. And I asked Clay about his experience of reaching out to you to kind of get clearance, get your blessing on whether it was okay to go through with that story. So now that
Yeah,
you're here, I want to get your half of the story. Like, what was your reaction when that came in, and have you read the story?
I have heard the story. Yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun. I should go listen to that before I answer your question because it did. I don't know. Did he tell you about the bitter fight and the legal action and all that? No, he was very kind. It was I'd never spoken with him before. I of course knew who he was, but one day I just got an email from him telling me he had this crazy idea, what it was, and would I be okay with it? And my first instinct was really, I don't know, because I'm very much a sort of like Clay when he is out doing his readings, he's got a very larger than life, bombastic sort of personality,
Oh yeah.
and I'm the opposite. I'd rather pull my little cover over my head and live there. Um, but it was a fun idea, and so I thought, yeah, go for it. Some level of some part of me is like sort of like embarrassed by the attention, but the other part is like, let's see what happens. It could be fun, and it was fun. It was a good little story. Um, he That was really all of it. I haven't talked with him much. He's been very kind every time we have. It's very nice to blurb one of I think Cathedral he blurbed, and yeah. Um, nothing like that had ever happened before. I doubt it will again, but it was pretty cool.
Um, so that I guess the natural next question is, as a writer and reader and bookseller, we're coming up to the end of 2025 now, and everyone's going to be making their best books of the year list and things like that. What have you been enjoying and or putting in people's hands in the horror world in 2025?
Well, I don't read as much horror as I think a lot of the listeners to your podcast do, which people always, well, I don't know if they always do. People might think it's strange, um, but it's just a narrower portion of my intake. That being said, um, of course, I think the big one so far for me this year has been Michael Wehunt's October Film Haunt.
Oh yeah.
It's a terrific book. I had the opportunity to blurb it, and that was a lot of fun. Um, I have read, highly recommend it to everybody. I read Caitlin Kiernan's latest collection from Subterranean. It's called Bright Dead Star.
Okay. Bright Dead
Uh,
Star. There we go.
yeah, Kiernan is always an easy decision to pick up her books or their books whenever they come out. Tanya Pell has a new book out. Tanya is a new writer, and she has a book of kind of like Gothic garden horror called Her Wicked Roots, which is a lot of fun. And Eric Lawrock has been just, I can't conceive of how he can be so prolific. But he's got a new trilogy, the first installment of a new trilogy out, which is harrowing to say the least.
Yes, yes. We Eric is a friend of the show. The book for listeners who still haven't heard about it is called We Are Always Tender with Our Dead. It is an unbelievably brutal, harrowing book from a major publisher this year. So yeah, definitely everybody go check that one out.
Brace
Um
yourself, though.
oh yes, absolutely brace yourself. But it's wonderful and I can't wait for the next installment of that. But for now, we are going to transition over to talking about a established name in horror fiction, a legend in horror fiction, and one of his best short stories. Nathan chose for his formative story to discuss on this podcast, Dread by Clive Barker, which is the lead-off story in Books of Blood Volume 2. It is, I would say, one of the more understated stories in Books of Blood, or at least it starts that way until it starts escalating and going to some really wild places. Nathan, what do you remember about your first encounter with this story?
So my first encounter with the story, I picked up these books when I was a teenager. They just came out in the late '80s, and Stephen King's famous blurb is what sold them to me. I see the future forward. His name is Clive Barker, and they had these incredibly garish, almost silly covers. They were like Halloween rubber masks with like little rubber worms coming out of the eye holes, and they were lit with these garish purple and green lights. It just looks so absurd and so beautiful to me. So I got them. And what I remember about Dread was so do we talk about, I guess we talk about this with spoilers and just
Oh
talk
yeah,
about it like,
yeah. We're gonna spoil a 40-year-old short story. So if you haven't read it,
okay.
go read Dread and come back.
What stuck with me was the sequence in which the main character, Quaid, imprisons another student named Cheryl in a room. Cheryl's a vegetarian. They've been having this philosophical debate, and Quaid is trying to figure out uh, when the moment of dread strikes, and how people react to it. And he imprisons her in this room with a piece of meat, and he won't let her out until she eats it. And so, of course, she resists for days, and then she starts to starve. And by this time, the meat is spoiled and gone bad, and there's flies have laid their eggs in it. And so finally, she cracks, and she eats it, and she's let out. The story goes on after that, but that was what I have taken with me ever since. Horrifying uh, that horrifying experiment, the cruelness of it, the diabolical cleverness of it. Um, uh, yeah, that's I've never forgotten that. And going back and rereading it, maybe I'm jumping ahead and answering questions before you ask them, but going back and rereading it, that was still the strongest part of the entire story.
It's an incredible sequence, and it's framed by the story is Quaid, who is this sort of urbane, slightly older philosophy major, very interested in philosophy, who meets another student named Steve, who is an English major who is kind of taking the philosophy course as a little break from his
Much younger.
regular course. Yes, much younger than Quaid. Finds Quaid very interesting and a little esoteric and strange, but compelling. And they there is a mutual friend named Cheryl who Steve sort of has a crush on, and then Quaid starts spending more time with her, and then the scene that you just described happens. Um, and reading it, it's very interesting. When I reread this last night, I remembered the scene as like he is showing when Quaid reveals that this is what he has done. He reveals it to Steve. I remembered it being like surveillance video, but it's actually more effective than that because what he does is show Steve a series of photographs. He's rigged a camera to at certain intervals take photographs of whatever Cheryl is doing in this locked attic room where he's imprisoned her. And the way Barker writes it, he paces it out so well because he counts out the photos. In photo one,
Yes.
she's realizing that she's trapped. In photo two, she's crying. In photo three, she's pounding on the door. And you just keep going until by the end she is devouring this meat, not in a disgusting feral way, but she is methodically just taking every little morsel of rotted meat off of this bone.
But what's
And
striking about this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, you absolutely go ahead.
A quick parenthetical about that particular moment is that Barker, contrary to what you might expect someone like him to do, does not lean into the description of that moment. He talks about it in just the way you did. He just says, yep, she ate the whole thing down to the bone, or he describes it. But there's no sense of the. There's a little, but there's very little. It's not an exaggerated moment. He doesn't play it for the revulsion scene that might be in a movie. It's just matter of fact, and he moves on. He lets the weight of the thing itself be the horror without having to kind of underline it with a marker, if you know what I mean.
Yes, which kind of goes back to what I was saying when we sort of introduced the story, that it is we tend to think of the books of blood in the way that you described those covers, right? We think of them
Yeah.
as big, bold, splatterpunk, garish things, but the secret to it working and lasting is the kind of interiority that Barker is able to give these characters and their situations. We have talked previously on this show about In the Hills, the Cities, which
Yep.
is one of the most splendid visuals that anyone has ever dreamed up. These two giants made up of thousands of humans fighting, but it's really a story about a relationship gone horribly wrong and these two people trying to find a way out of this situation that they're in. And Dread is that. Dread is uh much more and on the page in terms of subject matter as well. He is not there to talk about a piece of rotten meat and how nasty it is. He is there to talk about the cerebral quality and the pure sort of sociopathic cruelty that Quaid exhibits. And as if to prove that, the next sequence of the story is Quaid reveals that after she ate the meat, he let Cheryl out, and Cheryl didn't go to the police, didn't say anything about she just sort of left because she understood. He claims like she understood what I was doing. She's smart,
Mm.
she gets it. And that's when Steve realizes, oh, I'm next. And Steve's backstory in all of this was that for a brief period in his childhood, he was rendered temporarily deaf. And it terrified him, the idea that he could hear and then one day he couldn't. And his hearing eventually came back, but he remembers with such fear those moments. And he made the mistake of telling Quaid that. So Quaid suspends him from a grill like platform over a black chasm where he can't see the bottom and puts these special like bolted on plugs in his ears so he can't hear anything. And that is Quaid's experiment with Steve, which is even more subtle and dread inducing. Like I love how Barker is like, you're expecting me to go even grosser with this, but I am actually going to pull back and give you something even more cerebral than resisting eating a piece of rotting meat. I love that.
Yeah.
So but then it comes back. The great thing about the ending is it comes back because Steve is so traumatized by this that when he gets out, he is just sort of wandering around and gets taken to a homeless shelter, and they give him clothes that are too big for him, and he looks kind of disheveled and weird, and he gets a fire axe, and he ends up back at Quaid's place. And it turns out that Quaid has been researching Dread this entire time because he has a fear of clowns. And he wants to know how to tame it. And that is why he is trying to figure out the moment of fear, what causes it, where it comes from. And Steve is essentially dressed as a clown by the time we see him because he has these oversized clothes and this weird appearance. And he murders Quaid with a fire axe, which is just the most amazing, ironic way to bring this story full circle.
Mhm.
Um, and it fits right into all of it. Like the tonal balance here, where it goes from understated and dark to almost absurd by the end, is wonderful to me.
Yeah, it is. I think to me too. I think I'm not as entirely sold on the conclusion as I am the rest of it. For me, anyway, this is a story whose true power is in the initial trial, the initial test with the woman in the room. And once it becomes a little more, once it leans a little more into the absurd, it loses some of its punch for me. Maybe it's because it becomes more traditional in its horror story mechanics. The guy with the axe coming, although you know, I've been thinking about this a lot since rereading it for this podcast, and you know, give Barker credit. He knows what he's doing. He knows this is the guy who wrote In the Hills of Cities. This is the guy who wrote The Yattering and Jack. This is a guy who does not need to rely on traditional horror tropes. His
Right.
mind is far beyond having to use those. So why does he? It's a conscious thing. It must be. It's like, okay, if I'm going to have an axe murderer. And so this seems to me, the more I think about it, it's like it's almost a story that is about, well, it's called Dread, right? It's about horror. It's about the way we experience it, and I think how horror works, and maybe how horror readers and writers work in conjunction with each other. The because both both of the victims know the score when they're going in. They're not random people captured, and Quaid points this out. They know what the deal is. Just like we do when we pick up a book by Clive Barker and open it up and subject ourselves to what's inside. Um, and the dread comes from knowing the deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Farrell knew the deal, and because she knew it, that was the crux of the whole thing. Same thing with Steve when he was locked in there and he had his hearing cut off from him, and then the old tinnitus would come back because it wasn't just that he couldn't hear; it was that the tinnitus would resurface, and there were these big crashes and whoops. I think is how Barker described it. This enormous clamor in his head of just noise that was so disorienting and frightening. And Steve breaks right away. Quaid thought that Steve was going to be the one to be tough to crack, but but Steve was like, nope, I'm broken.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, and so then we get on to Quaid, right? And Quaid, I may have misread this, very possibly, but I think Barker wrote this in such a way that he leaves a lot for us to fill in the blanks.
He
It's
does.
interesting
Yes.
that you read that as a fear of clowns. Uh, that's not what I was interpreting. And I'm not saying I'm right and you're wrong. I'm just saying I think this was intentional on Barker's part. What I do remember is that at one point he throws up a lot of papers, not quite, but Steve, and this is after he snapped. And they go
Oh,
down and he sees pictures of axe murders. And we don't ever find out what these pictures are. Were they pictures of just random murders that Steve was obsessed with, or Quaid rather was obsessed with? Was he worried about random axe murderers? I kind of doubt it. It makes me wonder if it was his family, if his family was murdered, either by himself or by somebody else. And he has been obsessed with this and terrified by it ever since. I don't know, but I like that I don't. At first, when I first read it as a kid, I was frustrated that I didn't know. I was like, "Well, what's happening here?" But rereading it, I like that I didn't know. I like that Barker left so much negative space in the end. So we get this horrifying image of this guy who looks like a clown, not only because he's dressed in funny clothes, but he's been chewing his bottom lip, so there's blood on his lower jaw, and he looks pale. He's gaunt, and just this truly ghastly image. But besides that, like the whole apparatus surrounding it, Quaid's dread. We know what it is, but we don't know why it is, and I think that's interesting.
I think you're right. The reason that I brought up the clown thing, I mean, it's there in the story, but it is also there in like when you read the Wikipedia plot summaries of all of these stories. So which I've definitely done to refresh myself. So it's possible that I'm letting someone else's conclusion guide me there a little bit. But the axe murders are such an interesting part of this. And I should say, like, if you're listening to this without having read the story, the clown thing, like Nathan said, is much more understated. It is not like this guy has a bright red nose and his shoes are squeaking and he walks in and starts giggling like Pennywise. It is much more uh he cuts a very horrific figure the way he looks, but it's not
Yeah,
necessarily like an overt. He doesn't look like a circus clown.
it's
Um
totally blue.
yeah, it's just such an interesting way to work with those horror tropes, and yet it's I don't want to say subvert them because that sounds a little too simple. Because it's very much like I'm going to deliver the horror goods. You're gonna get if you're reading this as a horror fan, you're gonna get your fix. But I'm also interested in something more cerebral here in the way that I carry this out. And talking about it in that way, it reminds me of quite a few of your short stories. The one that comes to mind right off the bat, which is a story I recommend to people a lot, is Wildacre,
Mm.
um, which, for those who don't know, is a werewolf story, sort of. Is it the story that opens North American Lake Monsters? Am I remembering that right?
It doesn't open, but it comes early in the story. It might be second or third.
Okay, it's an early it's basically about a traumatic event that happens at a building site in the woods, and it's much more it fits in that werewolf story mold, but it's much more about the fallout of that traumatic event and what it does to the people who witnessed it and were around it, and the level of obsession that kicks in for this one man who feels whose life is falling apart essentially because of something that happened that was sort of out of his control, or was it, um what do you think about stories in that way, like a story like Wildacre, a story like You Go Where It Takes You, um in the terms of I'm going to give you a horror thing that you can latch onto if you're a fan of the genre, but I'm also going to go in a much more understated direction and try to probe. I mean, we already talked about you wanting to write emotionally realistic characters, but do you think of it that way, or is it more narrative focused and then you sort of get to see what you were writing about at the end?
It's more the latter. I don't always have such clear intentionality when I start. With Wildacre, boy, I can't even. It's been a while. I can't remember the details is so much anymore. But I was working on painting for a while, painting houses, and I remember being there one evening, leaving the site, and just seeing those big skeletal frames against against the backdrop of the sky, the darkening sky, and it was just really evocative and ghostly and eerie. And that was also the time right before the housing collapse.
Mm.
So, that conjunction of those things, were the seed of that story. But I think, yeah, I think with that one, I definitely wanted to have a real werewolf and a great werewolf scene. That was my intention. And then just explore what it did to him. I was very much interested in the that whole book was kind of interested in the effects of the supernatural or the numinous. Like if we just brush up against it, how do our lives change? A lot of the stories kind of came up from that notion, the notion of just exploring characters who bump into it, but who does it doesn't become the main arc of their life, or it's not the main story.
Yeah.
Their story goes on after that interaction. So that was where that one came from. And You Go Where It Takes You. That was the same kind of thing. It's like, what about this? What if this woman just kind of like has a one night stand with somebody who is in the middle of a traditional fantasy story or a traditional horror story? But instead of following him, we follow her after that happens. What does it do to her? Same with the guy in Wild Acre.
Yeah. Uh, I you don't post to social media a lot, but one thing that I remember quite clearly, and I had to go back and make sure this wasn't some sort of fever dream I had, but you posted a while back, going back a while now on Instagram, a photo of a notebook where you were sort of working through ideas on a couple of short stories and also on The Strange and some other things, but they were very thoughtful notes. It wasn't just like a series of word associations. You were really digging in thematically to certain things. How important is the note taking process for you in crafting a story?
In getting started, it's pretty important. I have to have a general idea of direction. Usually when I start a story, I have the beginning, a scene or an event, whatever, and I'll have a notion of the end. In order to have a notion of the end, I have to have the direction. So I'm like, if I'm writing a story about, well, let's just say the werewolf and the guy, I'll have to know. It sounds, I want to say why I'm writing it, but I don't really mean that because I don't, but it's the easiest way to, it's the closest thing to what I'm trying to say. It's like, what is the story trying to do? That's a better way of saying it. And what am I trying to explore or whatever with the story? And that's where the note taking comes in. I will think about, just who the characters are. What is it? Where do they find themselves in life? What is it they're trying to get, or what do they want, or what's their predicament, what have you? What is the supernatural element if there is one? How does it intersect? Um, and and once I get past that stage, I generally only go back to the notes in the notebook if I get stuck again, which invariably happens when I'm writing a story. I'll get stuck
Mhm.
2 or 3. And then I'll go back and either look at the notes that I've had already and have maybe I've forgotten, and maybe I'll get recalled to the road by seeing them, or just make new notes. Just start over and try to figure things out and just play out different possibilities. Um, yeah, many stories have had 3 or 4 different avenues branching out
Mhm.
from various points, and that I've tried to explore, and then picked the one that was right for the story, I felt.
This is something, and we're sort of free flowing right now, but that's the way I like to do this. We as much as we are a podcast about formative scary stories, we are also a podcast for writers about writing. And I love when people, especially established writers who have a reputation, talk about getting stuck, because I think that if you are someone who has had the level of output that you have had, and there is a polish and a clear style and voice to your work, it's easy to imagine a version of Nathan Ballingrud that sits in a room and dreams for 20 minutes, and then all of a sudden a story just sort of appears. But getting stuck, I think, is vital to the process. Like, you have to have a moment where there's a wall there, and you have to go, all right, do I go around this, over it, through it, under it? What am I doing? Do you do you think of getting stuck as just a natural part of your process? Does it frustrate you, or at this point are you just like, oh yeah, this is just that phase?
It still frustrates me, but
Yeah.
I also know it's going to happen. It doesn't freak me out like it used to. Um, I don't think it's the sign of a bad story or a failed project or vanished ability, any of that. I just think it's part of the process. I think of it as some days, this is a very facile thing to say, but some days it feels very easy. You just sit down and you really do just type and the words come and they look the way they're supposed to, and it feels great. And you close the laptop or put the pen down and strut around the house like you're something special. And other days, I just think of it's hauling bricks. And lots of times I just don't want to sit down, and I'll be trying to motivate myself to do it. And I'll just tell myself, well, this is a hauling brick day. You just get the wheelbarrow, you load it with bricks, and you just haul it up the hill. It's going to be one of those days. And just by thinking of it like that, I'm able to short circuit the anxiety.
I want to go back to Barker here because I think, I mean, there are a lot of prevailing themes in Barker's work, but one of them that's especially present in the Books of Blood is that I think he gets a lot of credit for, although he's not the only writer or the first writer to do it, is the idea that horror stories do not have to end with you killing the monster. They can also end with you sympathizing with the monster, befriending the monster, loving the monster, becoming a monster on your own. And I think that Dread fits into that very nicely in its own way. I also think that a lot of the stories in North American Lake Monsters, and in Wounds too, have that quality of, I'm not interested in vanquishing this stuff so much as I'm interested in understanding it.
Mm.
Is that something that you credit? to Barker as an influence on you? Are there other writers that you feel like led you that way?
I definitely credit Barker with this. This is the big effect Barker had on me as a writer, and this is why I chose a story by Barker for this podcast. Barker was the one who let me see horror fiction as a fiction of transcendence, instead of a fiction uh, of fear. I this is not to put down Stephen King stories. I had grown up on Stephen King, loved them entirely, and that was like 90% of my reading as a younger person was Stephen King stories, and so I understood horror through that lens, primarily the traditional lens of the horror is the intrusion from beyond. Whether it's beyond the firelight, beyond the cosmos, whatever. It's something else trying to get in where we have to push back. It's protect the ecosystem, whatever that might be. Uh, and that's how I think a majority of horror is written and filmed. Barker was the first one that I read where he just turned that inside out. And writing from the position of an outsider, as I think Barker did, he had a different perspective on the monstrous. And in Barker's stories, the characters would often be transformed by the horror, sometimes in ways that were horrifying for everyone else to observe or be witness to, but that somehow freed some elemental part of that character. And so the violence, even in Dread, what happens to Steve is unambiguously awful. But he is a brighter, happier being by the end than he was before. He's a terror and a monster now, but he does not look at it that way. And he's written story. He's got a novella Cabal, which is like expressly about this,
Yeah.
about the monster being the free agent. And yeah, and that's I that was a lesson that I got branded onto my brain, and because it felt so real and true. I think that's the first time I'd read horror fiction before and enjoyed it and had fun with it and felt moved or frightened by it, but this is the first time it felt like it was doing something more real to my personal human experience. It definitely changed the architecture of my imagination. There's no doubt.
How much do you credit Barker in I think, and this is not just me blowing smoke because you're here on the show today. I've said this other places. I think on a sentence by sentence level, you are one of the best craftsmen in genre fiction right now. Um, and I think that anyone who is reading Barker for the first time definitely picks up on his craftsmanship on a sentence by sentence level. He is his prose can be very luxurious, very evocative, very elegant. Is that also something that you credit Barker with? I know you mentioned going from King to Barker, and that I remember as a reader myself, that was sort of the leap for me as well. Like King being much more like a friend telling you a story, and Barker being more like I am going to get a little more operatic and bold with it. Is that something you picked up on from his work as well, or did that come from others?
No, I could probably credit Barker for that too. Barker, I love the prose. I remember I thought about this, objectively when I started getting into Barker. It was like, the writing is so pretty, and I love that too. I love beautiful writing. I always have. Um, and so Barker was the first one where, he was the one that showed me horror is beautiful or can be beautiful, and just in more than just one definition of that word, can be the prose can be beautiful. The transformation can be beautiful. The violence can be beautiful depending upon what it is doing and why it is there. The experience can be beautiful. And I definitely credit Barker with that. That's part of the revelation that I had by reading when I read him. It redefined the entire. I keep saying horror, and I think a lot of what Barker writes is horror, but he described himself once as a writer of the dark fantastic.
Yes.
And I think that's much more accurate to what Barker does. And I feel like it's more accurate to what I do. It's like the horror is there, but it's just part of the pie. And Barker's, his Weave World was another one that really kind of kicked open some doors in my mind. Is there horror there? Yeah, but it's not really a horror novel. It's something else. It's this dark glittering jewel wrested from the earth. It's like it's spooky and eerie and grim, but also beautiful and full of love. And it's an adventure story. It's all the things. And I find that to be such a beautiful expression of the form. It's probably what I've been chasing my whole life.
I think that anyone who's read something like The Strange, or in particular the Lunar Gothic trilogy so far, will understand that kind of genre blending, dark, fantastic thing. It's absolutely there in your work. And if you want to read beautiful fiction that does the dark, fantastic thing, pick up Crypt of the Moon Spider and Cathedral of the Drowned, and look out for Kingdom of the Conqueror Worm next year. Nathan, before we let you go, will you let people know what you have coming up and where they can find you online?
Yeah, I'm online. My last name makes me very easy to find. It's N Ballingrud on Twitter. I guess I'm hardly ever there anymore. Nathan Ballingrud on Facebook, Ballingrud on Instagram. Those are my online venues primarily. I don't spend a lot of time online, but I do pop up. And the thing that I'm working on now is, of course, Kingdom of the Conqueror Worm. That will be coming out next year. I'm working on a couple novels. I'm not really sure which one's going to take the front seat after I finish Conqueror Worm, but we'll see. And I've got a short story coming out in an anthology, a Halloween anthology next year called the story is called On the Night of the Welcome Stranger, which is related to another short story I wrote a few years ago called Skull Pocket. So that's what's imminent.
Excellent. Our guest has been Nathan Ballingrud. Nathan, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. It was great.
Thanks once again to Nathan Ballingrud for being on the show. Such an admirer of his work. It was great chatting with him, getting to know him a little bit. Cathedral of the Drowned is out now. If you have not read the first book in the Lunar Gothic trilogy, Crypt of the Moon Spider, you should absolutely go back and check that out. You should also pick up Nathan's short story collections, North American Lake Monsters, and The Atlas of Hell, aka Wounds. Those are incredible, essential pieces of horror literature of the past 25 years, in my opinion. So go support Nathan. Go get his stuff. If you would like to support us, the easiest way to do that right now is to follow us on Blue Sky. We are at scareshapedus.bsky.social over there. That is where you will get new guest announcements every episode we do, giveaways whenever we do giveaways, any other important updates. They're all going to be on Blue Sky. We are also the Scares That Shaped Us on Facebook if you want to follow us over there. And we are the Scares That Shaped Us on YouTube. If that is how you prefer to listen to your podcasts, head over there, like, subscribe. We appreciate the support. We also have a newsletter. It is hosted at MatthewJacksonWrites.com. That's writes as in WRITES, because I'm a writer. Get it? That is where you will find a lot of original horror specific writing and musings from me, including 31 original essays on John Carpenter's Halloween, one for every day in October. That series is completely finished. You can go over to MatthewJacksonWrites.com, read it completely free, as well as book reviews, musings on other films, a bunch of other stuff. We have some really cool stuff coming to the website in to the newsletter rather in November. So I hope that you head over there, put in your email address, subscribe. There are paid tiers if you want to throw us a little bit of financial support, but you absolutely don't have to. We would appreciate just putting your email address in and getting all of this straight to your inbox for free. And of course, if you like the show, please tell your friends, let people know what we're doing over here and how cool and fun it is, because I'm having a great time and I hope you are too. And if you really like the show, please do me a favor, head to the podcasting platform of your choice and leave us a 5-star review. That helps us get featured, which helps us get more listeners, which helps us keep growing this show. That does it for us this week. We will be back next week with another brand new episode. I'm not quite ready to announce who the guest will be, but it will be a good one. I promise. That new episode will drop November 12th at noon Central. Hope you all come back then. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. I'm Matthew Jackson, and this is The Scares That Shaped Us.